Tabitha Susan Wanjiko Njoroge is my name. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me again this wonderful day. Today we are going to tackle a very sensitive topic on suicide and grief, and focusing on what is happening around us. COVID-19 is causing a lot of anxiety and uncertainty among many people, and from the stories we are reading, from the newspaper, to the news we are receiving, to the many events that are happening around us, we have found that we have people who have died of suicide. And even during this particular time, we also have the survivors, the families that have been left by their loved ones. And I hope that I can focus on this particular issue, on how can the survivors cope when they have lost their loved one to suicide. And also on another episode, I will focus on what can an individual do when they realize that they are having suicidal thoughts. What are the steps in which they can use to reach out? For as much as it is hard to reach out, we need to look for that trusted person who can hear us, who can work with us and give us good intervention. So one of the goals of suicide is normally to end the misery, the pain. There's normally so much that is happening in the person, and they feel that this is the only route, this is the way in which I can do. So, but focusing on the family, because this particular episode I will focus on the survivors, now the family that have been left. How do they cope? How will they deal with this grief? Remember, there is a lot of trauma that happens when a family hears that their loved one died of suicide, and the trauma is caused by various things. Number one, the death of their loved one was very sudden and unexpected, so this did the family with a lot of trauma. Number two, it's also stigmatizing, because many people don't understand what is going on in the life of this individual. The stigma from the society, from the community, from your church, there's a lot of stigma. Number three, there's also a lot of self-blame and guilt. And the family tends to feel there was something they would have done. And they live with that guilt. They carry that guilt around them. And it becomes so hard for them to process the grief. Number four, family conflicts may arise. This is because, just like I said in the previous point, there's a lot of blame. There's a lot of self-blame. Then the family may tend to blame each other. Therefore, family conflicts arise. There's also a lot of anger and bitterness. And the anger and bitterness can come from the fact that they were not able to reach out to their loved one, maybe in time. There's also a lot of anger in the feeling that maybe a statement they said is what pushed the individual to going through the suicide. There's also a lot of bitterness in the fact that maybe the people who are near their loved one would have done something. Therefore, this complicates the entire process of this particular family. There's also a lot of fear and uncertainty in the future because they don't know if this may happen to another loved one in the family. Therefore, these particular families, or rather the survivors, are left with a lot of trauma. How can they cope? How can they move from the trauma to a process of healing? And I'd like to give some 5 ways in which the family, or rather the survivors, can cope with the loss of their loved one. Number one, they need debriefing. And for debriefing, this allows the family members, or rather the loved one, or rather the significant others, to talk about what happened, to give an in-depth analysis of what they thought happened. And for a debrief, this helps them to, one, acknowledge the death of their loved one, because it is very important to acknowledge that your loved one has died of suicide. Acknowledging the death is number one. Then number 2, it is important for me as a therapist to normalize their feelings and validate their feelings, because at times it becomes so hard for individuals to acknowledge that the death actually happened. So debrief is actually very important. It's very important to debrief. Then number 2, it is psychoeducation. They need to be educated on the stages of grief. If you can look at a previous video, I had talked about the stages of grief, and you will get to see some of the stages in which people go through grief. Then number 3, it is important to let them know that they are not responsible for the death of their loved one. Remember, we said they carry a lot of guilt and anger and bitterness, but it is important for the family to know that they are not responsible. Then number 4, it is important for the family, or rather for me as a therapist, to be very patient with the family, not rushing them, allowing them to go through the process. Remember, I keep saying grief is very important to go through the process. It is very unique to every individual, but it's also very important to go through the process and be patient in that particular thing, or rather that particular process. Number 5, it's also important for you who is reaching out. It could be someone else, not a therapist, but the person who is reaching out could be a neighbor, it could be a social worker, it could be a health professional, it could be someone who has had their first contact. It is very important to ask the family or the significant others, how would you like me to help? What are the areas in which you'd like me to assist? And by asking that question, you will not be focusing on what is not the priority to the family, but rather they're going to give you the immediate things that they would like you to focus on. Therefore, for this particular video, it was more on how can the family or the significant others cope with grief of losing someone through suicide. Remember, social distancing is starting to be hard for many people around us. They feel overwhelmed and disconnected from their loved ones. We also have individuals who are in isolation and quarantine, and they're also experiencing these uncertainties and the anxieties around. Let's reach out. Let's reach out to mental health practitioners. Let's talk and let's create awareness on these particular thoughts. There is hope and there's a lot of help out here. So thank you very much for watching this particular video. Remember to like, share and subscribe, and also comment below on what your thoughts were. And do you feel like the family can receive assistance? So have a wonderful time, and thank you very much.